Melania Trump, no stranger to the intense scrutiny of public life, stood tall and poised behind the lectern. She adjusted the microphone slightly, her movements measured and deliberate. The cameras lining the back wall of the formal East Room whirred softly, their lenses focused intently on her. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the assembled press corps. "Thank you for joining me today for this update on the Child Online Safety Initiative. Let's get started." As expected, hands shot up across the room. Reporters, eager for a story, leaned forward. Mrs. Trump recognized a journalist from a major network near the front and nodded. The reporter asked a straightforward question about the initiative's latest partnerships, and Melania answered with the polished grace befitting her position, detailing the program's progress. Another question followed, this one about international collaboration, which Mrs. Trump handled with the same assured poise. She had navigated countless such events before, but then a voice cut through the room, sharper and more insistent than the others. "Mrs. Trump, while you speak about online safety, critics argue this initiative is merely a smokescreen, a distraction from the administration's more controversial policies affecting families. How do you respond to that?" Melania recognized the reporter instantly, known for her aggressive style, always seeking to ignite controversy. The woman sat near the front, leaning forward with a challenging smirk, her pen tapping a restless rhythm against her notepad. A ripple of anticipation went through the other journalists. Mrs. Trump remained composed, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for your question," she replied evenly. "Today we are focused on the significant strides being made in protecting children online. This initiative addresses a critical need supported by data and extensive research within communities." The room seemed to settle for a moment, the focus returning to the stated topic. But the reporter wasn't finished. Her voice sliced through the air again, louder this time. "But are you addressing the real problems? Isn't it hypocritical to champion online civility when the administration itself is often accused of fostering division online? Are you truly tackling the issue or just managing perceptions?" Murmurs spread through the room. Some reporters exchanged uneasy glances. Others leaned in, sensing the confrontation escalating. Nobody wanted the event to derail, but it was undeniably heading that way. Melania Trump took a slow, deliberate breath. "I believe I've addressed the core of your previous question. We are staying on the topic of today's announcement," she stated, her tone still measured but firming noticeably. "If you have another question related to the Child Online Safety Initiative, I will be happy to answer it. If not, I will move on to another journalist." The reporter showed no sign of backing down. Instead, she leaned even closer to her microphone, her smirk widening slightly. "So, you are evading the question about hypocrisy?" The tension in the room became palpable. Every journalist felt the weight of the moment. This was no longer just an update on an initiative. It was rapidly becoming a spectacle. A hush fell, thick with unspoken anticipation. Mrs. Trump adjusted her posture subtly, placing both hands firmly on the sides of the lectern. Her gaze swept past the confrontational reporter towards another journalist raising their hand in the back. "I believe I have been clear," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I'll take the next question now." But before the other journalists could speak, the same sharp voice interjected again. "Why is it so difficult to get a straight answer, Mrs. Trump? Are you afraid of addressing the administration's impact?" A flicker of irritation finally crossed Melania's face, barely perceptible, just a slight tightening around her eyes, but visible to those watching closely. "Enough." She inhaled slowly through her nose, a picture of control as the camera zoomed in, panning between her and the insistent reporter, capturing every nuance that could be spun into tomorrow's headlines. "I will say this one more time," Melania stated, her voice now carrying a distinct edge of steel. "If you have a new, relevant question, please ask it. Otherwise, I must insist on giving others a chance to participate." This wasn't her first encounter with aggressive media tactics. She understood the press had a job, but there was a clear line between demanding accountability and hijacking an event for personal theater. The reporter simply smirked. "The American people deserve transparency, Mrs. Trump. Why is this administration, and by extension, your initiative, so opaque when faced with legitimate scrutiny?" A few quiet gasps could be heard. Melania's measured blink was the only outward sign the barb had registered. She gripped the lectern for a brief second before consciously relaxing her fingers. Then she smiled, but it wasn't the warm, diplomatic smile of moments before. This smile was different. It said, "I see exactly what you are doing." She paused, considering her next move carefully. The loaded words hung in the charged air. The reporter held her gaze, defiant. Another journalist, seated further back, cleared his throat nervously. Melania started to turn towards him, but the same voice cut in again. "Americans deserve real answers, First Lady, not curated performances." The cameras didn't miss a thing. The slight, almost imperceptible tilt of Mrs. Trump's head. The way other journalists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Point stop. A veteran journalist, covering Washington politics for decades, leaned towards his colleague and whispered, "This isn't journalism anymore, it's performance art." The reporter, however, seemed entirely unconcerned, perhaps even encouraged by the tension. She knew precisely what she was doing. The longer the standoff continued, the higher the chances of it going viral. A confrontation involving the First Lady was digital gold. Melania recognized this too. She had a choice: engage further and fuel the fire, or shut it down decisively. She let out a near-silent sigh, her eyes finally flicking towards the uniformed Secret Service agent stationed discreetly at the side of the room. That subtle glance did not go unnoticed. Several journalists visibly tensed, their gazes darting between the First Lady and the agent. They knew what that look meant. The dynamic had shifted. The confrontation was about to reach its climax. The reporter, who had remained poised with her pen hovering over her notepad, saw the glance too. Her defiant smirk faltered for just a split second. "Are you seriously considering this?" she demanded, her voice dropping slightly but still sharp enough to carry. Melania Trump remained silent, her expression impassive, her gaze steady. The uniformed officer by the door took a slow, deliberate step forward. The message was unmistakable. The reporter had two choices: de-escalate or double down. She chose the latter. "Unbelievable," she muttered, shaking her head. Then louder, ensuring the microphones caught it. "Trying to silence the press for asking tough questions?" "Freedom of the press," Melania stated coolly, her voice unwavering, "does not equate to hijacking a press conference dedicated to the welfare of children." The reporter let out a dry chuckle, looking around the room, seemingly inviting agreement from her colleagues. A few journalists looked down uncomfortably at their notes. None spoke up. The security agent took another, measured step forward. For a heartbeat, the reporter hesitated. Melania watched, her face betraying no emotion as the internal calculation played out behind the reporter's eyes. Then, the decision was made. The woman slowly gathered her notepad, adjusted the strap of her bag, and stood up. As she turned towards the exit, she delivered her parting shot, aimed squarely at the cameras. "You can kick me out, Mrs. Trump, but you can't silence the truth. Melania Trump remained perfectly still as the door clicked shut behind the departing reporter. A heavy silence descended upon the East Room. The cameras continued rolling, but the energy had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty. Some journalists pretended to scribble notes, others stared blankly ahead. Finally, a voice from the back tentatively asked, "First Lady, do you believe that was the right decision?" Melania turned towards the journalist who had spoken, her composure absolute. "I believe," she said distinctly, "it was necessary." Another voice immediately followed, hesitant. "You don't think this will backfire?" Melania offered no verbal response, but her slight, knowing look suggested she was already anticipating the fallout. It was inevitable. The internet would explode with selectively edited clips the moment she left the room. She could already envision the headlines. "Melania Trump ejects reporter for daring to ask tough questions." After a moment's pause, another hand cautiously rose. The press event proceeded, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The real storm, Melania knew, was just beginning to gather outside these walls. Within minutes, the footage would spread like wildfire online. By the time she stepped away from the lectern, the narrative would be firmly set. Distraction, not discussion. Later, walking down the plushly carpeted hallway towards her spacious West Wing office, Melania's phone began buzzing incessantly in her aide's hand. Staff members gathered in small, anxious clusters nearby, whispering in hushed tones. Nervous expressions flickered across their faces as they glanced from their screens towards the approaching First Lady. She didn't need to check the notifications to know what was happening. The reporter had barely been out the door for 30 minutes. The clip was already viral. One of her aides, Chloe, hurried to catch up, holding out the phone hesitantly. "Mrs. Trump, it's trending. The hashtag is silenced." Melania let out a quiet, frustrated breath, gesturing dismissively at the phone. She'd seen the playbook before. Some headlines, she knew, would report the events factually, but many others would be deliberately sensationalized. First Lady shuts down press freedom. Trump silences reporter who spoke truth to power. She wasn't seeking truth, Melania murmured, almost to herself. She was seeking a moment. Chloe nodded grimly. "That's not how it's being framed, ma'am." Melania knew this outcome was probable the instant she locked eyes with the security agent. Clip the confrontation, remove the context, add a dramatic headline, and let the outrage machine do the rest. It was a predictable, tiresome game. Still, she refused to show panic. She had weathered many media storms during her time in Washington. Narratives, she knew, could be fought, if not always entirely reshaped. She pushed open the heavy door to her office. Chloe and another aide. Marcus, trailing behind her. "Conservative commentators are praising your firm handling of the situation, Mrs. Trump," Marcus offered, scrolling through his own device. Calling the reporter unprofessional and disruptive. Melania nodded curtly, leaning against her elegant desk, arms crossed. Predictable support from that quarter. Chloe scrolled again, her eyes scanning the screen. But the reporter herself is leaning into it hard. She's already done a live interview, calling it a chilling moment for press freedom. She's getting booked on every major network, of course. Melania tilted her head back, gazing momentarily at the ornate ceiling. "She wanted this," she mumbled, her voice tight, "and we handed it to her." She didn't elaborate immediately. Instead, she walked to the tall window, looking down at the bustling street below, her jaw set. Outside, she could see news vans parked along the perimeter, reporters already gathering on the sidewalk, cameras pointed towards the White House entrance, waiting. The vigil had begun. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Her aides scrolled through the endless torrent of headlines and social media commentary. Opinions were sharply divided. Some defended her actions, arguing she handled an unprofessional disruption appropriately. Others decried it as an attack on the free press. "She's calling it an assault on democracy," Chloe read aloud from the reporter's latest social media post, her voice laced with frustration. "Today, I was removed from a press event for doing my job, asking tough questions the powerful don't want to answer." This administration claims to value transparency, but when faced with real scrutiny, they resort to silencing the press. This should alarm every American who believes in accountability. Melania let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. Accountability? She conveniently forgot to mention how she completely derailed an event focused on protecting children. Marcus shook his head. She's playing the victim perfectly. Selective editing, dramatic language, it's working on some channels. It was all so predictable. Melania had seen this strategy employed time and time again. Now came the crucial decision: how to respond. Her first instinct might have been to fight fire with fire, call another briefing, meticulously lay out the timeline, reiterate that removing a disruptive individual wasn't censorship. But she knew how that, too, would be spun. Turning back from the window, she saw another news truck arriving, another reporter disembarking with a microphone. The story was feeding itself, growing larger by the minute. She tapped her fingers rhythmically on the polished wood of her desk. "What's our strongest countermove?" Chloe hesitated. "We could release the full, unedited footage immediately, Mrs. Trump, before her narrative solidifies completely. Let people see the entire exchange, how many warnings she received before security stepped in." Marcus nodded quickly. A simple, factual release. No defensive statements initially. Just, "Here is the raw footage. Judge for yourself." Melania considered it. Letting the facts speak for themselves was appealing. But she also knew that in the arena of public opinion, facts alone were often insufficient ammunition. Perception frequently mattered more. Her phone buzzed again. Alerts for upcoming cable news segments, panel discussions already dissecting her actions, opinion pieces analyzing her authoritarian decision. She took a deep, centering breath, then gave a single, decisive nod. "Do it. Release the full footage. Now." Her aides moved swiftly, drafting a brief, neutral statement to accompany the video link. The reporter had sought a spectacle. What she hadn't anticipated, perhaps, was that Melania Trump wasn't just reacting. She was setting her own stage for the next act. Within the hour, the complete, unedited video was posted online under a simple title: "Raw Footage, Exchange Between First Lady Melania Trump and Reporter at Child Online Safety Event." Melania leaned back in her chair in the quiet solitude of her office, watching the view counts climb exponentially. The comments section exploded, a chaotic mix of outrage, support, and debate. Her phone buzzed with a message from a media contact, a prominent conservative host. "Smart move. We'll feature it tonight." Showed commendable restraint. But Melania knew the battle was far from over. The reporter was already making the rounds on sympathetic networks, expertly spinning her victim narrative. Melania clicked on a link to one such interview. The reporter sat in a darkened studio, brow furrowed with practiced indignation. "I was just doing my job," she told the sympathetic anchor, asking necessary, albeit tough, questions about the First Lady's initiative and its context within the administration, and instead of answering, they removed me. The anchor nodded gravely. "Did you feel threatened?" The reporter sighed, a masterpiece of theatrical concern. "Not physically, no, but professionally? Absolutely. This is an attack on journalism itself. The interview cut to a panel of experts, each echoing the sentiment. Unsettling precedent, a troubling moment for free speech. She was simply fulfilling her journalistic duty. Melania let out a sharp exhale and locked her phone screen. The unedited facts were out there, but that was no guarantee people would choose to see them. Her assistant, Chloe, peeked into the office again. "Mrs. Trump, they're covering it on PNC now." Melania walked silently with her to the outer office, where several staff members were gathered around a large screen tuned to the conservative news network. The host was playing the entire clip, the one her office had released. He paused it at crucial junctures, highlighting the reporter's repeated interruptions and Melania's attempts to regain control. "Let's be clear," the host declared emphatically, shaking his head. Melania Trump did not silence the press. She silenced an activist masquerading as a journalist who deliberately sabotaged an event about protecting children. The panelists beside him nodded vigorously in agreement, framing the incident as a necessary stand against media bias and grandstanding. Melania crossed her arms, observing the predictable polarization. Conservatives lauded her strength. Mainstream and liberal outlets condemned her alleged heavy-handedness. The story dominated the news cycle for days. Headlines screamed, talk shows debated, social media endlessly dissected every second of the exchange. Memes proliferated, some mocking the reporter's theatrics, others painting Melania as an imperious figure silencing dissent. Then, amidst the noise, something caught Melania's attention. She was watching a clip from a more centrist panel discussion. A veteran journalist, someone whose integrity she respected despite their often critical stance, leaned forward, his expression serious. "We have to be honest here," he said, his voice cutting through the usual partisan talking points. "Watch the full tape. This reporter wasn't seeking truth. She was seeking a viral moment. She asked a question, got an answer she didn't like, and then repeatedly escalated, pushing for conflict, not clarity." The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. This level of candor was unexpected. When she was finally removed, the veteran journalist continued. She immediately ran to the cameras to claim victimhood. "That's not reporting. That's activism manufacturing outrage." Was the First Lady's response ideal? Perhaps not, but let's not pretend the reporter was an innocent victim exercising press freedom. The host frowned, pressing him. "Are you saying Mrs. Trump was justified?" The journalist shrugged slightly. "I'm saying we, as the press, need to be honest about the difference between journalism, which is to inform, and performance intended to generate clicks and heat rather than light." This incident blurred that line significantly. Melania let out a long, slow breath. Someone with credibility had finally said it plainly. But she knew the narrative grooves were already carved deep. The damage, in many ways, was done. Those who wanted to believe she suppressed free speech would continue to do so. Her supporters had likely already moved on to the next political skirmish. As Chloe timidly approached her office door again, likely with another interview request, Melania held up a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. "No more interviews on this, Chloe, not from anyone." She stood up, walking back towards the window. "We released the facts. They can do with them what they will." Chloe paused, then nodded in understanding. Melania picked up her personal phone, scrolling momentarily through the still active notifications before silencing it. The storm would eventually pass, as they always did. But the incident lingered, not just as a personal frustration, but as a stark reflection of something larger. The fractured state of modern media, the potent machinery of narrative creation, and the increasingly fragile place of nuanced truth in a landscape optimized for outrage. She turned back to her aide, a flicker of a wry smile touching her lips. "Now," she asked, her voice regaining its usual composure, "what's next on the agenda?" Chloe waited a beat, then consulted her tablet. Melania nodded, ready to move forward. The game continued. Melania picked up her personal phone, scrolling momentarily through the still active notifications before silencing it. The storm would eventually pass, as they always did, but the incident lingered, not just as a personal frustration, but as a stark reflection of something larger: the fractured state of modern media, the potent machinery of narrative creation, and the increasingly fragile place of nuanced truth in a landscape optimized for outrage. She turned back to her aide, a flicker of a wry smile touching her lips. "Now," she asked, her voice regaining its usual composure, "what's next on the agenda?" Chloe waited a beat, then consulted her tablet. Melania nodded, ready to move forward. The game continued.